libraries, I am there. So thanks for including me. A little quick history on me and how I got involved with libraries. Part of the reason why I'm so excited to come tonight is when I was in college, I ended up college by accident. I was an athlete that wasn't really destined for anything great, but I was good enough to get into a school. It happened to be a small private Lutheran college. I wasn't Lutheran, and I was the only openly gay student on campus. And so I decided, and it sounds like we have this in common, to create my own degree in queer studies, and this was in the early 90s, and I had a history professor as well as an English professor who sponsored it, and it got a little bit of pushback from the administration, but we got the degree through, and through the work of studying queer studies, LGBT studies, one of the things that really came up during the program for me was the importance of access to information, that we all, regardless of who we are, what our backgrounds are, and what we're struggling with in life, is that we all need access to the ideas that are going to help us hopefully form our futures. And queer people have, particularly historically, have had issues accessing the information that helps them understand their history, their culture, and making a difference. And it turns out that libraries, which I learned during my queer studies program, have been on the forefront of just about every major social justice movement, particularly if you look at early the U.S. history. And I was really intrigued by that librarians, we think of librarians, we have this idea of librarians as being kind of these, quiet types, introverts in the background. But we're actually, librarians and libraries as a profession are one of the most progressive, subversive, and radical institutions that we have of our time. And I think that, in my mind, libraries are one of the greatest innovation stories never told. And that's where I got interested in libraries, was actually studying queer studies. So I went on and got my library degree, had a great stint at the Gates Foundation working in libraries around the U.S., helping them get connected to the internet. And I worked in Seattle libraries, San Francisco libraries for 7 years, and now I have the great honor of being the commissioner of the Chicago Public Library here in Chicago. And for those who how many of you are librarians? I'm just curious. I met a few. Oh, good. We got some librarians in the house. Chicago is one of the great public libraries of the U.S. It's the second largest library system in the country, only second in terms of locations to New York. It's also one of the largest cultural institutions in Chicago. We have 80 locations, about 1,000 employees, a budget of north of $100 million. And if you look at the major cultural institutions in Chicago and the sport and all the sort of major sporting events, actually more people walk through our doors every year than all those institutions combined. We have about 12 million people that we see every year, and we are the largest provider of public access technology in the city, the largest provider of free homework help in the city. Actually, every one of our locations in Chicago, you can go in there after school, get free homework help. Actually, you can go online and do that as well through the library. So we're a big player in the cultural sector in the city, in the information sector in terms of access to information, and certainly in the literary in culture building sector in the city. And so I'm super excited that I get to participate in leading one of the great cultural institutions, not just of Chicago, but of the United States. And so why I was excited to come and talk a little bit about libraries today is that I think some of us in our minds, and I know all of you don't think this way because you're familiar with libraries, you're familiar with the archives, but sometimes we think of libraries as being these outdated institutions. And certainly as I talk to folks about the work that we do in libraries, particularly those who aren't maybe using libraries as regularly, maybe they're going to sporting events more than they're going to libraries, is they have sort of an outdated idea about what a library is. They don't think of them as these great radical institutions. They don't think of us as these leaders of innovation within our communities. But in reality, I think that's what we are. So I wanted to give you a few examples of some of the things that we're doing at the Chicago Public Library that might give you an insight into what libraries can be in a new age, in a new era. To do that, I thought I could talk just for a second about the state of Chicago. I think that we're all aware that Chicago is one of the great global cities, and that Mayor Emanuel, who asked me to come to Chicago, so he and I have talked a lot about libraries, but we talked more about where he's trying to take the city. And if we think about Chicago as one of the great global cities, Chicago needs to be competitive in an increasingly flat economy. we're all aware that sort of the future of competition in a global city is our ability to be to compete in what's called the knowledge economy. So this idea of having a smart, educated citizen base is really the sort of the secret sauce of what makes a competitive city. And as it turns out, this idea of sort of a competitive city, the knowledge economy, libraries can and do have a really important role in supporting a smart, competitive city. And that's really how we've been looking at Chicago Public Library in sort of the larger strategy of the city, is that if we can support the education initiatives of the city, helping create strong, smart communities throughout the city, if we can support sort of the economic aspects of where the city is trying to head, and not just helping with the education part, but helping in the formation of jobs, supporting people finding jobs, looking at ways that we can help people who are wanting to form businesses. So these are all parts of what we see our role in supporting the larger city of Chicago in an increasingly competitive and increasingly global city. And I think that a couple of examples of things that we're working on right now in sort of the technology space that I think are interesting is, have you heard of the UMedia lab at the Harold Washington Library?
Yeah.
So if you haven't heard of it, UMedia, we started as a pilot in 2009, and this is sort of an example of where we're pushing technology a bit, but also where we're supporting kids in out-of-school time learning. It's a space that's designed for teens, and there's a digital media lab, so there's a Mac lab where you can do graphic design, there's a recording studio where you can learn to record music, there's an editing studio where you can learn to create films, there's gaming consoles where you can learn actually how to do game design, and of course there's a lot of books, and then it's populated with people who are working professionals in each of these different sectors. And what's interesting about the space, and I think what's very cool about libraries, is that libraries are really intended to be interest driven. So you come to a library, it's a community space, but you're coming there around what interests you in that moment and in time. It's very different than a traditional academic setting. And so what we decided to try to do with Chicago Libraries for Teens is create a space that had sort of a menu of options that might be of interest for a teen, particularly a menu of options hopefully that are linked to future careers. Populating that space with tools and technology, with books, but also with working professionals that can help these kids hopefully find a pathway in life. And what we found is that UMedia has been one of the most successful programs. It's been modeled in 30 different cities across the U.S. We've now expanded our UMedia to 11 different locations around the city. So that's an example of kind of where we're working with teens. I have some great photos at some point if you want to see them. Another is the expansion of the work that we're doing with homework help. We have a program called Teacher in the Library. We work with, until recently, about half of our libraries. You could go in after school and a kid could get free homework assistance one-on-one with a teacher. We just expanded that to all locations, and as well with the library card, you can log on to any computer with internet and access a teacher or a tutor that can help you in English or Spanish from ABCs all the way through calculus. So those are the kinds of things that we're doing sort of in that space. One of the things that we just recently also opened is something called, have you heard of Maker Lab or 3D printing or that kind of thing? So Chicago, again, kind of getting back to a knowledge economy, we're trying to position Chicago to be a leader in the global economy. It already is one of the leaders that actually has a larger gross product than Sweden and Norway and certain countries. And but one of the areas is advanced manufacturing. And so what we decided to do is create a manufacturing lab where there's 3D printers, CNC milling machines, and a variety of other tools and technologies that support sort of this what's called the maker movement. And we opened this at the Harold Washington Library. We've seen about 30,000 people in the first 6 months walk through the doors, and about 4,000 people who have taken classes. And what's really cool about this space is it's working artists, it's people who are in science, various different parts of engineering, it's jewelry makers, and these are all people who are working together on various different projects that are of interest to them. And again, it's the library as a community space, the library as a space that's interest-driven, but it's also a library that helps people exchange knowledge in some less formal ways. And I might actually ask for a glass of water, if that's possible. Is there like a little bottle of water? I didn't
It's coming.
think of it. So I give these a few examples because I think, oftentimes when we think of libraries, we think of them as repositories of knowledge, and certainly when we think of archives, when we think of libraries, it is an important part of our history and it's an important part of our mission as we look to the future is how we can certainly store knowledge and provide access to knowledge, but increasingly libraries are about how to, oh, thank you so much. You're such a good helper and a great host. Increasingly, libraries are moving beyond just this idea of a passive repository of knowledge and ideas, or moving beyond just sort of the passive distribution. So, we have a repository, we're going to give you the information. We're moving towards a natural evolution of knowledge creation. And so how do we then, in a library setting, so we think, traditional library setting, repositories of information, how can we begin the process of taking this incredible information that we have, archives, books, materials, and begin actually engaging in creating new knowledge, new ideas, and an exchange around those knowledge and ideas. And I think that's really, when we look at the future of libraries, I think that's where we're headed. And when I think about, at least in my experience, we have a large archive at the Chicago Public Library. We have a significant Civil War collection, one of the largest collections of the World's Fair. And we have a lot of neighborhood and community archives. The Vivian Harsh collection, which is the largest African American collection, or second largest African American archive in the United States. These collections, we're increasingly looking at how certainly we can digitize them, but how we begin engaging community around them, how we begin having community dialogues around this content, and almost creating new knowledge as part of that process, and capturing that knowledge along the way. And so when I think about sort of the opportunities that lie ahead for libraries, we're as much about being the storehouses of knowledge as we are about being the facilitators of new ideas and creating new ideas. We're as much about handing off information to our customers as we are about helping them create new ideas with that sort of the knowledge that we have. And I think the Maker Lab is a great example of that, where in that case we're not necessarily handing out books, we're not necessarily connecting people to ideas in that way, but what we're doing is creating a space where people with various different interests and backgrounds through serendipity can come together, can share, can learn, and create community around those ideas that are of interest and of value to them. And that's, I believe, as we look at sort of a knowledge economy and look at being a more competitive city and ultimately nation, if we can create community spaces that encourage and facilitate active exchange of ideas, taking pieces of our history, learning about those, and hopefully creating new ideas and new knowledge, that's how we begin to push ourselves to be hopefully a smarter, more compassionate, and hopefully sustain our democracy in the future. So that's what I think about. That's how I think about libraries. And I don't know if we want to maybe open it up for conversation specifically about your library and kind of what your ideas are for the future.
I know that there, on a link I just got this morning from Lucas, there are 4 libraries in the greater Chicago area that have gay something or other in them, beside, including Gerber Hart. I know of 2 Jewish libraries in town. How many specialized libraries are there in, and do you have relationships with them?
So at our not Lincoln Park Library, I'm getting the library name. So at the Chicago Public Library, we have one library that has a gay and lesbian special interest collection. It's not a true archive.
Merlot.
I'm actually not.
Merlot on Belmont. Merlot.
What?
Belmont.
Is it Merlot? It's Merlot. Yeah. So the Merlot Library, it's more of a circulating collection. It's not an archive. To my knowledge, I don't really know what the other significant collections are. Maybe you might know better than I.
The Leather Archives and Museum, there's a religious, gay and lesbian religious group, and I forget who the fourth was at Northwestern. And I don't know enough about them. I was trying to wonder how beyond the gay issue in the Jewish library, are there a lot of other specialized libraries that deal with the same problems that we do? Because they're specialized and not under your huge expensive umbrella.
Our huge expensive umbrella. Well, I mean, there are a number of. There's lots of private libraries in Chicago that have a variety of different special interests. I mean, I'm less familiar with what the different. I mean, you might know actually what the answer is, or of what the other specialized libraries are. No.
They're
Center on Halstead has some as well.
The I mean, every medical school has a library, every law school, every club, association has an archive of some kind. There are, Nell Taylor's has the Read Write Library, which I would volunteer to.
Oh, that's a cool library, yeah.
Which is, collects everything you've written in Chicago and past work produced in Chicago. So if you did a zine in Chicago for a few years and it's been sitting in a box under your bed, you can give it to the Read Write Library and they catalog it, and you can go in and find it in the catalog and they'll pull it off the rafters. And one of my poems is archived in the Read Write Library. It's not on a gay or lesbian theme, but a technology theme about librarians, actually. So there are a lot of people like Nell Taylor's Cooperative who form small collections like this, but they all have a mission or an idea about what they're doing that's very important to them, that they, most of them won't compromise on what their initial sort of vision was. For her, she wants it open to the community, so she'll take literally anything that people bring her. And she doesn't judge or curate exactly what it is they accept. They curate what they put up on the walls, but the collection itself is just a big collection. And there's a special librarians association that you can join, and they actually have a committee in the ALA. You can actually go to the American Library Association and represent special libraries or be someone from a special library.
And then each community that has its own historical society has an archive.
How do the archives fit in? I've never even heard that the Chicago Public Library had an archives. How are those available to the public, and how are they generated and collected?
So we have a number of our collections are pretty fragile, so they're in specialized stores and those kinds of things, but you can make appointments to access them through our archivist. We are increasingly digitizing our collection, so they're available online. We're actually just about to launch something called Content DM, which is just a database that allows it a little more easy access to those digital assets. But basically you can provide access online as well as in person. The Hart Library, if you haven't visited, or the Hart collection is actually it's really a wonderful collection. And again, any member of the public can come in and access and view those materials. We'll just give you some white gloves and get them that way.
With an armed guard.
Well, I don't know about an armed guard. maybe a stern librarian. But the question of archives, I think, as you're looking at kind of building a strategy, and one of the things that we thought a lot about at the Chicago Public Library is where we fall on certain spectrums. And for example, do we want to be on one end of the spectrum, library as a repository? So how much do we want to be a repository of knowledge versus the other end of the spectrum? How much do we want to be help create new knowledge? And we probably don't want to be on either end fully, but we're trying to kind of figure out where we fit somewhere in the middle. Chicago Public Library, in contrast to say the New York Public Library, while we do have some archives and special collections, New York Public Library has 3 major research libraries that are they're very different than the kinds of libraries that we have here. So the way that they might answer that question in terms of repository versus content creator or portal might be slightly different. And I think any library, there's sort of a series of different questions that you kind of need to answer for yourself about what is it that we want to be. Actually, I think that there's great value in being, when you look at archives, there's great value in focusing just on being focusing on being a repository and storing the information really well, doing a great job of digitizing and getting that content out there so that people can see it. There's many libraries that actually are not generally open to the public, but really what their mission is to get the content out there and for people to use it. There are some libraries that are much more interested in creating community spaces than they are having the materials out. But these are all different questions, I think, that are important for any library, depending on what they're trying to achieve, should be answered.
Ta-da!
What I would think after 30 years being a librarian, Gerber Hart should probably think about focusing on archival and special collections. I've seen GLBT students since 1980 to 2013 now comfortable with checking out circulating books about any kind of topic. I mean, the Gerber Hart circulating collection is probably not as needed as it used to be, because now any young person, old person can go to their local public library, their academic library, check out books on any gay topic, and it's not what it used to be anymore. And that's part of the Gerber Hart history, which I totally remember and know, that there were times when you wouldn't go to CPL and check out a book, you know, on a gay topic because the librarian might, you know, say something to your parents or know you. And that's all changed. That's all changed now. Plus, there are ebooks and digital things now. So I'm kind of thinking the Gerber Hart function, the most important thing is preserving our archive and our history that we have that's not digital. And as I've seen in my tour of the library, thanks to Lucas and Carrie, the paper collection that we have that needs to be preserved. I'm not so sure we need to worry about a circulating collection anymore because...
So using this is an example. I mean, one way to focus would be on the actual preservation, and another could be which is huge. It can be I know just from experience that sometimes it's hard to get a funder excited about preservation. But on the other end of that, if you can get if you can really preserve these materials and get them digitized and find interesting ways of displaying and sharing and engaging people in that unique history, you might be able to kind of look at both of those things. Like one is about preservation and one is about sharing the unique items in your collection. That might be a way to think about it too.
Absolutely, and maybe we keep a collection of, phonographs and pop literature or whatever as an archival collection, and we preserve it as a thing. Pulp fiction novels and all of that stuff, and we save that now because someday there's not going to be a paper copy anymore. It's going to be on a Kindle or whatever. So maybe we don't need a circulating collection and to spend our time doing that anymore, but refocusing that we are the repository as opposed to bigger libraries like Michigan and Stanford and U of I that also have these things, but we have them here.
So I think that in that sort of vein of library as repository versus library as sort of as a portal, I do think it's important. This is something that we're doing pretty regularly at Chicago Public Library, is trying to think about what our end goal is in terms of for the Civil War Archive, for example, or for the some of our community history collections. Is our goal primarily to preserve that content so people can come and look at it? Or is our goal to engage people around the rich history of Chicago's neighborhoods? Is our goal to engage people around the lessons that we should be learning from Civil War? And these, I don't know that there's a real necessarily answer, but I think that it's important, at least in my experience, to be any organization has to be really focused on. Particularly one that doesn't have a lot of resources, and actually all of us should have to be doing this, really focused on what it is that we're trying to achieve, who it is that we're trying to reach, and how we can maximize the resources that we have to achieve that goal. And but archives are a it's a big question, like what's the right way to be focusing on archives to support what your community mission might be?
Carol Ronan just joined us. And Carol Ronan and I have a specific interest in the American Revolution and the risks that people took, putting them and themselves and their families and all of their worldly goods at risk to move an idea, whether it's freedom or trade or whatever. And part of my passion about Gerber Hart is that it's I think some of the materials date back to the 1920s, am I right, Lucas? There's a period in time in which we have the ability to try to gather all this material that is still, exists, try to gather as much of it as possible, and to also use it as an opportunity for people to look into the minds and the time that the minds of people who have to make decisions like this to move ahead the GLBTQ freedoms. And